Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 229 of Show Viewers. Today we'll be going over the second volume of War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. So this is about equal length of the first volume. It's about 300 pages. But I just gotta say, sports fans, this one seems a lot longer because volume 2 was quite the slog. However, there are high points in it. So I guess I'll kind of discuss the four main characters' stories individually. So first story I guess I'll go over is Pierre. Pierre has a lot going on in this. So first, Pierre ends up falling in love with Helen Kurgan, and he falls in love with her. This was discussed in the previous one. He falls in love, gets married, but we then see as his honor is hurt because we see as Dolokhov ends up speaking with Helen, and Helen appears to be unfaithful. So Pierre ends up challenging him to a duel one day, and Pierre actually ends up winning. And we see as he kind of ostracized for this, he starts having a lot of difficulty with Helen, and just kind of see as that continues to play out throughout. That's all there really is for Pierre. Also, we then get to see individually for Pierre. I was about to say that's all there is, but no. We see as Pierre's kind of struggling for a time. He ends up falling very deeply into alcoholism and stuff like that. And one day he ends up running in with the Freemasons. He ends up joining the Freemasons and starts executing his deeds with them, I guess, pretty colloquially across his properties and all that. And he begins to be more terrible and stuff like that. But ultimately, he kind of starts to become disillusioned with the Freemasons again, starts falling into alcohol a little bit more, and other, non-Mason-like tendencies. And we just kind of see as that progresses. And then later on, the final part of Volume 2, he has a bit of more of a role to play. But then I guess I would discuss Andrei. So, Andrei, I'll discuss Andrei last, because I think his storyline is probably the most interesting out of all in Volume 2. So I guess I will go over Rostov, Nikolai. So we see as Nikolai is back in Petersburg, he ends up kind of communing, falling in love with Sonia, but then he ends up getting shipped back off out into the military for a time, and this is around the first part. He doesn't fall in love with Sonia until later on. But yeah, he was already in love with Sonia by deepening their love. And so we see as he's sent off to the fronts, and actually sent back not to necessarily the fronts, but he ends up running on with Denisov. Denisov ends up getting wounded, and we see as Rostov is attempting to deliver a message on Denisov's part, because Denisov is being sent to a trial because of thievery, even though he didn't really steal anything. He stole from a thief. But yeah, so we see this, and Rostov tries to deliver the message, but he's really unable to do so. And then Denisov is sent off to a hospital where everyone's essentially dying. It's horrible conditions. And Rostov is trying to find him. He ends up finding him. And then ultimately, Rostov ends up taking Denisov's place. Now, I thought Denisov had died here because Rostov took his place. No, it's just a temporary change. But then we see as Rostov is sent back home on leave. And this is where he kind of starts falling in love with Sonia. They end up just continuously deepening their love. We see as Sonia even rejects an engagement proposal by Dolokhov, and everything seems to be going well for them. However, we see as their families, or the family of Nikolai predominantly, since Sonia is adopted, we see as they are against this marriage that's eventually proposed, and it is not looking good. So then on to Boris's story. Boris Drubachevsky, Drubatovsky, I think that's his last name. It's something like that. It's a weird Russian name. What we see kind of is he's generally just in Moscow here. The big thing that he does is he gets married in this part to Julie Kurgan. Yeah, it is Kurgan, I think. Yeah. No, it's not Kurgan because her brothers died. It's a different Julie. It might be Karagan. There's so many damn Russian names, it's kind of hard to remember. But yeah, so we see as he ends up getting married, nothing really important happens with him. It's just him and Natasha's love kind of disappears, it dissipates. And so then on to Andrei. Now, Andrei has a lot going on. So his child is born in this, the early portions of this part, and we also see that his wife dies during childbirth. And Andrei is obviously disheartened by this. He also sees his child is very sickly. I forgot to mention, this volume covers almost, it's either 7 or 6 years of story. So there's a lot that happens, but it's not really super major stuff. We see his child is sickly and all that. And within the house, we also see as Maria ultimately starts to get more and more criticized by her father, whose name is Nikolai Bolkonsky. And we see this. We also see as he starts to fall for her handmaiden, the Malie Boyer, or something like that, whatever her name is, or Bjarne. But yeah, so I see that. And with Nikolai, the big thing of this is he starts kind of going a little bit more into like the political side of Moscow and stuff like that. He ends up meeting this dude by the name of Sopransky, who's more of like a liberal when it comes to like, I guess, the rights of the peasants and stuff like that. I mean, not liberal in the sense of today, but liberal in the sense of that time. Because the term liberal is always fluctuating depending on the era that you're in, because someone who was liberal would, like, in 1700 be considered conservative in the modern day. But yeah, so with that, we see as he starts falling in love with Natasha. Now, Natasha, as you know, is of a higher class, and well, not of a higher class, but they're about of equal class, and he starts falling in love with her, but she is significantly younger than him. And so we see as he ultimately decides, yo, I'm going to propose. He ends up proposing, asking for her hand. Her parents are chill with it, but his father is like, I don't think you should be marrying this very young woman. What will your son have to grow up with? So it's like, go abroad, find your son a tutor, and see how long the love will last. And so Natasha is left with this promise of Andrei coming back within a year to then marry her. So we see as he goes abroad, he starts going around all Europe. He ends up finding a tutor for his little son, and then who's also named Nikolai after his grandfather. But see that, and then we see as Natasha has to deal with this. We see as Natasha's kind of going around high society and stuff like that. She's very, I guess, sad at the fact that but Andrei is abroad, and she has to grapple with this. At first, her love is steadfast and strong, but then later on in the volume, we see as a problem gets thrown in the works. And his dadgum name, Anatoly Kuragin, and we see as she ultimately ends up falling to his whims. And Anatoly and Natasha end up sharing a kiss, and they ultimately end up deciding, yo, we're gonna elope. We see as Natasha ends up writing a letter to Andrei to essentially call off their proposal. Also, we'd seen they had their families had a brief kind of disastrous interaction where Natasha ultimately kind of did some rude stuff when she went to go see Maria and the other Bolkonskis, and she kind of things went poorly. And so then after that, we see as Natasha ends up trying to elope with Anatoly, like I said, and with this, Anatoly ends up recruiting the help of Dolokhov, who he's good friends with, and see as this goes, they try it, and ultimately they end up failing because what's her name? Because at the time, Natasha and Sonia were at, her name's like Maria Dmitrievna, and I think it's Maria. Hold up, let's go find her. Crap. Alright, it's not that important. I'm not gonna be able to find it. But yeah. So she ultimately ends up coming to this, and she's like, I'm disgraced by you even being in my house, and they're not related to you because you've done such a shameful thing. And she's like, I'm gonna have to tell your father, but then Natasha ends up like breaking down bad. Like, she gets sick and almost dies because of how bad the stress from this event was. And ultimately she does not end up telling her father, but it gets very bad. So we see ultimately as Pierre ends up coming over by their request and all that. They have a discussion and everything, and Pierre learns what Anatoly has done in trying to take Andrei's engaged or betrothed. And so we see as Pierre goes and confronts him at one of Helen's parties, one of Helen's mini parties, because Helen is always holding parties. She seems to be very unfaithful. But yeah, so we see this. He goes there, confronts him. He's like, yo, you gotta leave. So Anatoly ends up leaving after taking a bit of an apology from Pierre for insulting him, and he heads off. So then we see as Andrei ultimately ends up coming back home after all of his travels, and admits how he found a tutor for his son. And we also see that he learns the fact that Natasha has called off the engagement very abruptly, and he's chill with it. He's like, okay, that was completely her opinion, completely up to her ability. I was settled on this whenever I left. It is perfectly fine for her to do that. So, Andrei, Chad as usual. He's a W here. He's calm, collected. But yeah, so that is predominantly where that volume ends. Like I said, I didn't have too much to say about it because it honestly wasn't really interesting. Now, like the last part with us seeing the failed elope between Anatoly and Natasha, that was really cool. That was really interesting. That's probably the best part of this volume. However, it was just kind of slow. Like, it was a bit of a slog, and it was just kind of a lot of the aristocracy stuff, which I'm not a fan of in War and Peace. But it is probably going to get picked back up soon because there's not any kind of loose plot points at the moment. So I expect that they're going to go back to the war front, especially with it now being 1812 in the story. So I'm really ready to excited to see where Tolstoy ends up going in Volume 3. Now, when I do make my videos on Volume 3, 4, and the epilogue, they might all be combined into one, but I haven't really decided on that yet because it is a little, I guess, kind of too little content to be making videos on individual volumes for it. So I'll probably end up combining those three things into one. But yeah, so that's all there really is for Volume 2 of War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. And that's all I really have for episode 229 of Shelf Review. So thank you very much for watching.